Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Megan Shamus. I am the Senior Director of Marketing at the FIDO Alliance, and we're really excited to have you all here to talk about how to implement passkeys for your digital services. I want to thank Thales for sponsoring this webinar, and all of you for registering and being here today. So before we get started, I just want to go through a couple housekeeping notes, everybody's favorite, right? So you're on the On24 platform, so welcome. You're all in listen-only mode, but you do have a question widget where you can ask questions as we go through the content today. We will save the Q&A till the end, so don't fret if we don't ask your question right away. We will get to them at the end. We are recording the webinar, and you will receive the link to the webcast directly following the webinar, and you can log back in and watch it at any time. And then lastly, there is a survey, so I would really ask you to please stay on and take the survey. It's really helpful for us to inform the content that we give to you in our other educational programs. So please do that. Today, we're mostly going to be leveraging both the slides widget and the media player. So please make sure you have those open to ensure that you see all the content today. So today we have two speakers. We have Andrew Shikiar, the Executive Director and Chief Marketing Officer for the FIDO Alliance, who's going to go through some fundamentals of passkeys and the status of where we are with passkey adoption. And then we're happy to also welcome Pedro Martinez, who's the business owner for digital banking authentication at Thales, who's going to talk through some of the considerations for implementing passkeys for your own digital services. So please let me pass things off to Andrew, and we'll get things kicked off. Andrew?
All right, Megan, thanks so much for kicking this off. And thank you, Thales, for sponsoring this webinar. And thanks to everyone for joining today. This is our first chance to talk to many of you in person in 2024. I think it's worth looking back a little bit and recognizing that in many ways 2023 was the year of the passkey, especially for us at FIDO Alliance and the broader FIDO community. At this point last year, we were still talking more hypothetically about passkeys. So there's certainly some early adopters in their early stages of rollout, but the growth of implementation and the explosion of interest and adoption was truly remarkable across 2023, to the point where we have companies like these that you see here, as well as literally dozens more who are now supporting passkey sign-ins in their websites and native applications. All told, there are over 8 billion user accounts that can now use passkeys instead of passwords. Right? That includes all the different relying parties and service providers total accounts that they have. These are that's basically the eligible addressable market for passkey usage. It's really a phenomenal number. And I'll dig into that a little bit more, like what that really means. But it's great progress to go from 0 to 8 billion and over 8 billion in just over a year. And the reason why that's possible is that the technology is there, right? So passkeys, the idea of syncing the private key is new, but FIDO authentication is not new at all, right? And FIDO has built-in support in virtually every modern computing device and every web browser, meaning that as a service provider, if you decide to deploy passkeys, implement passkeys, you can have high confidence in knowing that your end user's device will support the technology. But let's back up a little bit further. Like, how did we get to the situation where we are today in user authentication, right? So while 8 billion passkey-enabled accounts is certainly great progress, our work is very, very far from done. The fact of the matter is we're still living in this password-centric, shared secret-centric world where we're dependent on passwords, right? And that's been everyone's frame of reference since the beginning of the internet, really since the beginning of computing. Passwords are what we know, and we've caused so many problems, such as those you see here. And you've seen our slides before. We could spend 45 minutes going through stat after stat of the problems that passwords cause, both direct costs, security costs, as well as opportunity costs from things such as abandoned shopping carts. And the way we've tried to address this as an industry, really for the past 20 plus years, is, well, recognizing that passkeys are flawed and then coming up with ways to put Band-Aids on that gaping wound. The fact of the matter is, layering on is not sufficient, right? We all know that SMS OTP, while readily available and better than a password alone, is highly susceptible to account takeover and man in the middle attack, machine in the middle attacks, and also has very poor usability, right? So layering on and coming up with added ways to supplement passwords really is not the answer either, and that's why we've introduced passkeys. All right, so passkeys, let's define passkeys. Passkeys are basically any passwordless FIDO credential, but they're truly a password replacement, right? It's an entirely new way of contemplating user authentication where a password needn't exist. So instead of trying to address the problem by putting phishable layers on top of phishable layers, we now have a fundamentally stronger primary layer of authentication with passkeys. How do passkeys work? Well, this is how FIDO works, right? And passkeys, again, are FIDO credentials. Now, the key thing that FIDO introduces here in the authentication relationship is the concept of the authenticator. The authenticator essentially mediates the authentication process between the user and the server. But the other fundamental change is that instead of having a knowledge-based secret on the server, you now have a public key, right? There's a key pair rather than a knowledge-based pair. The public key sits on the server, and the private key sits down on the user's device or on the authenticator. The private key is dedicated to each app, but it's a possession-based approach to user authentication, which prevents remote attacks, right? Whereas with passwords or knowledge-based factors, you can dupe that, you can steal it, you can guess it, you can phish it. With public key cryptography and FIDO's approach to user authentication, that's simply not possible due to this approach. Now with passkeys, we add in a new wrinkle, which is that in addition to letting the private key sit on the device with a device-bound passkey, you now also have the option to let that key be synced across the cloud. So it can be securely synchronized across a device cloud or an OS cloud, allowing for that private key to be readily available immediately across the user's devices. And frankly, with the historical FIDO model, this is the gold standard from a security point of view, but it does present some usability challenges, namely that the user must enroll every device for each service rather than having it be readily available. So with key synchronization, this is now a more user-friendly, readily available approach for large-scale consumer implementations. But FIDO's approach since day one has been to provide simpler, stronger user authentication, and we've been doing that since 2012, coming up with approaches to authentication that are both simpler and stronger than passwords and legacy means of 2FA, such as OTPs or SMS. FIDO is essentially standardizing public key cryptography with a very user-friendly approach. And the usability is paramount to adoption, right? History is littered with old, highly secure technologies that weren't adopted at scale because they were too difficult to use. And the fact of the matter is, usability matters, right? So for consumer applications, if you're making them jump through hoops, your consumers simply won't opt in. Even in the workforce, your employees will find workarounds to difficult MFA. So FIDO is really seeking to blend that in a standards-based manner. By working on standards, and FIDO's general approach is to unleash the power of open standards by having a common interface, a common approach that people can implement FIDO authentication. So when you go to a vendor and your implementation partner, their server will work with someone else's authenticator, or you can have hybrid infrastructure where you have multiple vendors providing similar functions, knowing that these things will interoperate. Additionally, by working on open standards and a standards-based approach, we bring worldwide global insights into what are the market requirements for user authentication. What are the usability requirements for passkeys? Well, how should this be localized in different geographies? These are all things that a standard can readily take on, contemplate, innovate, and implement in pretty rapid time frame, as we have actually with FIDO authentication. So I have that, and so this is all being manifested with passkeys. As we go back to FIDO's function and FIDO's goal of providing simpler, stronger authentication, again, passkeys fully meet that requirement, which is one reason why we're seeing such adoption at scale. But also, again, we have two options on how you may choose to implement passkeys. We have, the synchronized keys, which I talk about, which have, a higher usability quotient. And then for, highly regulated or security intensive implementations, you can also use device-bound passkeys, which bring a, higher level of security assurance on the on one front, and can be implemented either in device-bound passkeys and security keys and/or native apps with UAF. So these are ways you can implement passkeys. Again, all of these approaches are leaps and bounds more secure and more usable than legacy forms of multi-factor authentication. And we've seen proven success with passkeys so far, right? So hundreds of companies have implemented passkeys. And you see some data points here. Google has been very prominent in pushing passkeys to every Google account user. They're seeing much higher sign-in success rate, much faster time to sign in. You're seeing similar data points with Mercari, who's seeing large improvement over legacy like SMS 2FA, as well as faster sign-in time. Air New Zealand introduced passkeys to ANZ customers. Saw a lot of interest, a very strong opt-in, with again, key KPIs around sign-in time, sign-in success rate. Additionally, they've seen reduced costs associated with account recovery and call center attacks. And then in the workforce, Hyper did a study with Forrester, which found that companies that have implemented passkeys are seeing, of course, naturally wide reduction in password use, but associated benefits and cost reduction as well, to point to a very clear ROI for implementing passkeys. Additionally, we're seeing pull. All right, so our recent State of Authentication survey found that over half of consumers are aware of passkeys, and perhaps more critically, the vast majority of IT leaders are not only familiar with passkeys, but understand that passkeys will benefit their overall security posture. So IT leaders are looking to implement this today for very good reason. So with that, it's a very good segue for me to pass things over to Pedro Martinez of Thales, who will take you through the rest of today's slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, as you well know, we at Thales, we joined the FIDO Alliance quite early on, and we have been contributing on the board and leading technical groups as well as business work groups. And so we are extremely happy to see the success of the technology. We have been working on different types of technologies over the years, and you see some being a resounding success and some others that are a mild success. Sometimes they are very good ideas that don't get the adoption. But in the case of FIDO and Passkeys, I would say that after working on it for quite a number of years, it was around 20 months ago when we finally became totally convinced that this was going to be an absolute hit, and that this technology was going to achieve something quite significant, which is to end up with our dependency on passwords that we have had since we have internet and digital services. So very happy for that, and I'm very happy to be as well participating and trying to make our modest contribution on it. And so building on some of the things that you just said, we want to share some of our experience, because over these 20 months, we have been, as soon as we got convinced that this was going to be a hit, we started to visit customers and prospects to share with them information that in many cases was still not visible to them. Many customers that had not yet heard about Passkeys, and we went to them with a message that this is coming. This is in many ways here, even if you don't see it yet. And this is going to happen. Passkeys will end up replacing passwords. And we were telling them at this point, we consider that this is something that is inevitable. And we were telling them it is inevitable, and obviously we were receiving a lot of skepticism from them, sometimes talking about the technology that they had not even heard about. We were getting a lot of skepticism, but we were giving them some reasons why we thought that this was inevitable. And the first one is that Passkeys had many evident benefits, some of which Andrew already highlighted. On one side, it's boosting the user experience compared to the usage of passwords. Biometrics is the reference from a perspective of user experience. That's a big improvement. And also, it's not only about having to enter the passwords whenever you want to log in, but it's about the entire experience associated to them. We are all sick and tired of forgetting passwords, having to renew passwords, having to reset passwords. All that goes away. So a much better user experience is the first great benefit. Andrew already highlighted, there is also a second very big benefit. We are not only improving user experience, we are also improving security. In the past, years ago, it was kind of a compromise. No? Whenever we were trying to improve the authentication solution for access to digital service in terms of security, it was at the cost of degrading user experience, or vice versa. We are now at a point that we are capable with FIDO and Passkeys to improve at the same time the user experience and the security. And as Andrew mentioned, there are two big benefits as we see them from the perspective of securities, that Passkeys are immune to phishing for the reasons that we already commented. The end user is not exposed themselves to the Passkeys. It is the device, the authenticator, the one that is managing the Passkeys on behalf of the user. And so by removing the human factor here, we are removing in a big part the risk related to phishing. No? And the second one is related to data leaks. We are all very familiar with news on media that are telling us about this or that service provider having been attacked, and thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of end user accounts or username and passwords that have been stolen. And even each of us, if we take our phones and we go to the settings and we look for the section on passwords, we may easily find some kind of warning or notice that is telling you that there are a certain number of the passwords that we use on a daily basis that have been compromised and that we should be changing quickly. So in the case of Passkeys, we do not have a risk as we have with passwords or even with symmetric keys, as are the seeds for OTP authentication. We don't have that risk because, as Andrew mentioned, we are using publicly cryptography, and so we are only storing half of the key. We are only storing the public part of the key. The actual secret, the private key, is not stored on the service provider server. So there is not that risk. That is not only a security risk, but also a very big reputational risk for the brand that is potentially subject to this risk. So that's also a very big motivation, we believe, for service providers to adopt Passkeys and go away from passwords. And the third big benefit, as we see it, is that they can have Passkeys, or switching from passwords, using passwords to using Passkeys, can have a direct impact on ROI. No, on one side, because and Andrew has shared some of the early statistics from a number of service providers that have already implemented, which are very, very promising numbers that prove that with Passkeys, users can have a more user-friendly login, a faster login, a better user experience, less abandonment, and all that leads to a better engagement between the users and the brand, the service provider, and ultimately can have an impact. So we are getting to a point where users may decide to spend more time with a certain brand versus another one, just because the login experience may be better than what they get in some other place. So that may be a differentiator and certainly can have an impact on ROI. On the other side, there is also the potential for cost reduction, because there are studies from Gartner and from Forrester that talk us about the fact that up between 20 and 50% of all the help desk calls that service providers receive are related to incidents of password reset. So that's a huge cost, especially if we take into account that, according to another research, those type of events can be very costly for the service provider. So these are very important benefits, and these by themselves could be quite promising. But great benefits are not always enough in order to grant that new technology takes off. Something else is needed. We will get to this second reason a little bit later. But before I want to insist on the message that Andrew mentioned, that we have seen a lot of different service providers that have been deploying Passkeys already over the last 12, 16 months. And it's good to see and to see their applications and see their interfaces implementing the technology already, and service providers from many different markets and many different users. All what they have in common is the will and intent of leave behind the usage of passwords and providing a better experience to their users. These are some of the same names that Andrew was mentioning, but there are two names that were not in the list of icons that we were showing you before, that are particularly significant because these are the main responsibles for us getting up to those many billions of accounts that are already enabled. And these are, on one side, Apple themselves, that since October last year decided with the upgrade to iOS 17 to issue by default passkeys for all Apple ID accounts. And so right now these passkeys have become the primary means for login to Apple ID accounts. So that's a huge number of passkeys deployed in terms of volumes. And the other one, similarly, is Google. Google had already enabled as an option the possibility for users to activate passkeys as a means of authentication instead of passwords, but they have also been making moves towards making them the default option for authentication. So if you think about that, it means that pretty much, whether you are aware or not, probably right now you are already using passkeys, even maybe without knowing it. On our side, from Thales, we also are doing our contribution. Like I said, we have been evangelizing and we have been showing the benefits to some of our customers, and we have a number of deployments that we are working on. But in particular, we have already announced, for example, together with Soyo in Colombia. Soyo is an identity provider in Colombia that is coming from a consortium by 3 out of the top 5 banks in the country. And we have helped them to implement and to deploy passkeys as the main means for logging to their solution. And hopefully many more will be coming, and we will be talking about very soon. So with that, I would like to dig deeper in some of the concepts related to the passkeys themselves, because there are a number of considerations that you may want to keep in mind at the time of deciding what type of authenticators, what type of passkeys are the best fit for your specific needs. So first of all, as Andrew said, so passkeys are cryptographic credentials for authentication of users to digital services, no? And following these specifications that have been built and developed by the FIDO Alliance. And these specifications, or the protocol around the FIDO Alliance, essentially what was defining was, as Andrew said, the notion of the authenticator, which is in the center of this figure, and an authentication process that takes place in two steps. The first step is user verification, and that happens locally between the user and his own device, the device that he's using. So this is typically done by using the biometric means that the user device has. If we are talking about a mobile phone or a tablet or or a computer, if it has a fingerprint sensor or if it has facial verification, that's typically what is used for this first step. And this step takes place locally. The successful verification of this first step between the user and his own device is what is going to unlock the second step. Is going to unlock the authenticator, the device, to initiate the second step. And the second step is a cryptographic exchange. Here, according to the protocols and the specifications that have been defined by the FIDO Alliance, a cryptographic exchange that takes place between the device, between the authenticator of the user, and the FIDO authentication backend that belongs to the service provider. Because one thing that is very important to understand is that a passkey is a unique link between a user and the service provider. The device, the authenticator, is the means for storing and holding that passkey, and the owner of the authentication server that has to be on the other end of that authenticator is the service provider themselves. So this is the basics of the FIDO authentication, but it prompts one question about different types of authenticators that are possible and with different characteristics. So let's think about that for a moment. Well, the first type of authenticator, actually the first type of authenticator that came to light over the years with the FIDO Alliance is a dedicated hardware device, a dedicated authenticator in the form of typically a USB token, but also possibly with the form of an smart card, for example. No? These hardware tokens can be a very secure option, obviously, but they require an investment on this specific hardware. As an alternative to that, the second alternative as an authenticator would be a mobile application. The mobile application, this could be owned and managed by the service provider themselves, and it is possible to embed into the mobile banking application a layer, an SDK that implements the FIDO technology, so that in order to enable the mobile bank application as an authenticator, as a FIDO authenticator. That would be a second option. The third option, however, is the one that probably has the biggest impact in terms of usability, and it's actually the reason why we came to the point of being sure that this technology was going to be a total success. And it's the fact that it is possible to build in an authenticator, a FIDO authenticator, on the operating system of consumer devices such as mobile phones, tablets, and computers, so that these devices themselves can become a FIDO authenticator, can be used for FIDO authentication directly. Let's dig a little bit more into that. We'll go back to the platform authenticator, but before, considering these three types of authenticator, just a quick thought on which type of verticals or which type of use cases are more prone to rely on one type of authenticator of another. Now, on this slide, we are not presenting you a unique solution, but it is our observation that this is probably the first choice or the most common choice for an authenticator. Not the only one, but just a very common one. So, for example, when the use case is providing authentication to employees, so when it's a matter of equipping the workforce with means for authenticating to the company resources, the level of security that is very often required in these cases drives towards the deployment of dedicated hardware. So hardware tokens or smart cards that can be built as a physical, logical access device. So it could be a corporate badge that is used both for physical access and for logical access, for example, or it could be a USB token as an authenticator. So that is a common choice. There can be other options, but it's a common one. To present another type of use case, very different, we want to refer to the usage for consumers. So all of us as users of digital services, these digital services may want to provide us a means of authentication based on FIDO and Passkeys. And there are two possible cases. So there are some industries such as, for example, the financial industry, that is bound to a number of security regulations that call for some form of elevated authentication that at the same time, in this same industry, being oriented to consumers, it is not a good fit, or is not a good fit for the big masses of users to deploy dedicated hardware. So the compromise here, it can be the implementation, as I was saying before, of a FIDO authenticator within the banking app itself. Okay, I will explain a little bit more about that, but essentially the point here is that this solution can be, on one side, convenient. It is not costly. It can be deployed to the masses, and it can meet the requirements of the most stringent security regulations in regulated industries such as in the financial industry. The third type would be non-regulated industries, also for consumer. So, and here just listing some examples of services that would be that are not regulated, as it is the banking industry. And in this case, the best way of addressing when you don't have a stringent requirement in terms of security, and we will see why later on, the easiest way of enabling users to authenticate with Passkeys is to rely on the FIDO authenticators that are available on the devices themselves through their operating systems. And arrived to this point, this is the second aspect that I wanted to highlight in terms of the big reason why Passkeys are going to be successful. And it's because these platform authenticators, as we call them, we have, as of today, and we have had for during 2023, it has already been the case. We find ourselves in the situation, as Andrew highlighted as well before, that pretty much every mobile device, every smartphone, every tablet, every laptop, every PC computer is equipped today with an operating system that supports FIDO, that supports Passkeys, and that is massive. That is the main. That is a huge traction for the technology. Now we have this ubiquity of the FIDO technology that together with the benefits that we highlighted before makes us be convinced that, and now we have already proved after 1 year. We were saying we were convinced 1 year ago. Now we have proved that is the case with all the many billions of accounts that Andrew highlighted before. But I want to highlight one more thing. It's not only at the level of the operating systems that there is support for Passkeys. The work of the FIDO Alliance and the collaboration with the W3C led to the point where we are today, which is that any web service running on any of the major traditional web browsers that we use day in and day out can access. So web services running on regular browsers can access the FIDO credentials and can initiate a FIDO authentication directly from a web service. It doesn't need to be built on an app. You can run FIDO authentication directly from a web service, which is also a huge, huge benefit. And that leads, that combination leads, and I want to stress again the point that Andrew was making, which is that we find ourselves with today 96% of active browsers supporting passkeys and 98% of mobile devices supporting passkeys as well. So with that level of ubiquity, it is absolutely certain that passkeys are going to thrive. So we have three types of authenticators, and now we were focusing a little bit on these platform authenticators because they are deployed by the millions, by the billions. We all have them in our hands. We all hold authenticators. We don't have to deliver specific authenticators to anyone, nor in the form of an app or in the form of anything. But as Andrew was saying before, these platform authenticators have one specific characteristic, which we have to discuss a little bit more about. And Andrew mentioned it, is the fact that they can enable passkeys to be synced. And what does it mean for passkeys to sync? So I'm going to take an example of a user. In this case, we're going to say it's an Apple user that, say, has an iPhone, an iPad, and a MacBook. And let's say that this user is visiting a certain service provider, and in going to this service provider, he or she is invited to create a passkey for that service, for ease of login. So what is going to happen is that, well, the passkey is going to be created on the device that he's using to access, in this case on the iPhone. The passkey is created on the device as a key pair, as we were saying before, a combination of private and public key. And the public key is sent to the FIDO authentication server of the service provider. And so the passkey gets declared there, so that from that moment on, authentications can take place between these two devices. Okay, well, that's a standard FIDO, as Andrew was saying. What happens next, though, that is something that is specific in this case to the implementation of Apple, and is that the private key is going to be uploaded from the device to the iCloud keychain of that Apple user. And from there, automatically, that passkey, that private key, is going to be propagated into any other device associated to that user's Apple ID. So all other devices that he has associated to himself or herself will be receiving that same passkey. So the passkey gets propagated automatically. Well, the benefits of that are pretty self-evident. On one side, for the user, there is no need to enroll more than once. So he enrolls on a first device, and then when he visits the service on one of his other devices, the passkey is already there waiting for him, and he gets invited to use it in order to authenticate. That's great. And even more than that, and a second benefit is that we have now a backup for the private key, meaning that if we lose our device, we don't have to go through any kind of identity verification or passkey recovery mechanism, because we can easily recover that passkey from our own, in this case, Apple ID account. As soon as we log a new device, say that I have lost my iPhone, I get a new iPhone. As soon as I log in to that iPhone with my Apple ID, I will be retrieving the passkeys for any services that I may have created. So that's great. However, there can be in some, and that's great for many services, particularly for unregulated services. But for some regulated markets, such as the finance market, well, there can be some consideration. So what are the concerns that there can be around that? Well, for certain service providers that they see as they are passkeys as a link between themselves as a service provider and their users, well, certainly here we are introducing in the equation a third party, whether it is Google or Apple. Here we have someone else, a third party that is intervening, that is managing, that is manipulating the passkeys. the service providers, and so that may not be comfortable for all service providers, depending on the case. But there is also a bigger concern, a more important one, which is that again, in markets like the financial market that we work a lot with, there are specific requirements around strong authentication, and for a multi-factor authentication method to be considered strong enough and compliance to financial regulations, for example, typically there is the need. You need a combination of two authentication factors. You could say in the case of a passkey, we have biometrics on one side and the factor of possession, the device, the authenticator on the other side, except that when passkeys are syncing and moving from one device and propagating to multiple devices, you don't have a device binding between that passkey and one single device. So as a possession factor, you can no longer, by using a passkey, you are not proving possession of the device where that passkey was created. At most, what you are proving is control over a Google account or an Apple account that can be linked to multiple devices. So that is problematic for compliance with certain regulations. Okay, well, so that's something to take into account. With all that, what's the conclusion? Or what is the recommendation as we see it and as we share it with our customers and prospects? Well, we definitely think that passkeys are great, and but we think that it's important that service providers take into account the differences between the different type of passkeys and what to use them for. So in our view, on one side, we have platform passkeys, so the ones that are created natively by the OS of the device, phone, tablet, computer. These platform passkeys that potentially can be synchronized, they are great as a password replacement. If the intent is to substitute the usage of passwords for low assurance authentication by something much better in terms of usability and in terms of security, platform passkeys are great. They are ubiquitous, and they provide great security and great user experience. That's an absolute no-brainer. On the other side, there are other type of passkeys. As we mentioned, we have hardware tokens or mobile application passkeys that can grant the device binding that is necessary for certain regulated markets, and particularly for the financial market, to comply with regulations. So that is our recommendation, to use one type of passkeys or passkeys through mobile authenticators or through hardware in the case of workforce, and use platform authenticators for password replacement. Let's dig a little bit further on that. If we would put on a scale with one X for user experience and another one for security, and we start with what has been for digital services the most common form of authentication, we would be putting here passwords, and with a very quite certainly a poor security and a poor user experience. When we are in this situation, it's an absolute no-brainer to implement and deploy platform passkeys in order to replace these passwords, with a huge improvement in terms of user experience and a great improvement as well in terms of security. However, even if there is a significant improvement in terms of security, remember, we are avoiding phishing, we are avoiding data leaks. That's very significant. It may not just be enough in the case that these passkeys synchronize to reach the requirements, the regulatory requirements. And so for that, the deployment of platform passkeys as replacement of password can be complemented, if necessary, with the deployment of device-bound passkeys on mobile apps. So service providers can implement a FIDO layer through an SDK on their mobile apps, And with that, they can have an authenticator, which is going to be fully compliant with financial regulations. So higher security. A slight loss from the perspective of user experience, because it means that whenever this authenticator needs to be called, if you are using for access to the service a computer, you need to make an out-of-band call, as is commonly done today with other technologies such as OTP, in order to complete that authentication. So it's not as comfortable as it is a login, but the combination of two allows to achieve the two objectives, which is security compliance with regulations and replacement of passwords. Finally, as we said, for workforce, you may want to go one step further in terms of security and deploy for certain use cases a dedicated device as well with device-bound passkeys, but in this case, on dedicated hardware. Okay, arrived to this point, we would like to propose you a quick poll. And linked to what we were saying here, we would like to know if you see interest in passkeys for password replacement, or you see it for implementing a strong authentication for your services, or eventually for both, or not. We're getting some answers. We may move to the results, and even if they are not definitive, in the interest of time. So we have about half of the people that has voted already. So let's see the results. And apparently everybody sees interest in passkeys, and for both use cases, both for a strong authentication and for password replacement. Thanks for that. So let's move on. Okay, with that, we have talked about the different types of passwords, the different types of passkeys, the different types of authenticators. So from the perspective of deploying the technology, what do you need as a service provider in order to deploy passkeys, deploy FIDO? Well, on one side, you're going to need an authentication server that is FIDO2 certified. And then with this authentication server, you're going to be able to serve, at least in the case of our Thales One Welcome authentication server, FIDO authentication server, you can manage all kind of passkeys. You can manage passkeys that are issued by platform authenticators, so from the OS of the devices, and on the backend side, we can be managing passkeys generated by platform authenticators. But we can as well provide an SDK with a FIDO layer, so that you can embed this FIDO SDK into your mobile banking application in order to turn it into a FIDO authenticator, so that you have a mobile app that is now fully compliant with all kinds of regulations, capable of issuing device-bound passkeys from your own app, and without intervention of any external party. So you are fully under control on the client side and on the backend side as a service provider. And then finally, as well, you have the third option that we mentioned, which is hardware tokens, whether it is in the form of USB tokens or smart cards. There is a wide portfolio that you can be choosing for. But essentially, this is what you need: authentication server only if all you want is to leverage platform authenticators, because the FIDO layers, you have it already there on your devices. If you want to go one step further, you are going to need an SDK for mobile apps, or you're going to need hardware tokens on the client side. Hopefully that's clear. Let's move. Right to this point, very quickly, I just want to drive you through the two main use cases. There are several, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to treat the two most common use cases. The first one is the creation of a passkey. And I'm taking here the example that is a very common one, which is, as we are going to be on a transition, so digital services identify their users already based on username and passwords. So a user is going to log in as they do today with their username and password. And in order to drive this transition, a quite common user experience is to, at that point, provide an invitation to users to enroll for a passkey, just explaining them that is a much more user-friendly and safer means for authentication moving forward, so that they don't have to use their password again. So if the user decides to choose yes, that they want to do that, then they are going to get an invitation to create a passkey. And remember that the FIDO authentication or the FIDO protocol, it goes into a step. The first one will be a local authentication between the user and his device, probably through biometrics, fingerprint or face. And the successful completion of this first step will trigger the actual creation of the passkey on the device of the user. Let's zoom in for a second to this process. Like we said, for the passkey creation, the passkey will be created on the device of the end user, the device that he's using for login. And the private key will stay on the device. The public key is going to be sent and declared on the authentication server. And at that point, that passkey becomes unique binding between the service provider, the user, and the device that he has used for creating the passkey. Okay, so in terms of user experience, the user experience is very basic. No, this would be, and this is the example of one of the early implementers of Passkeys, which was PayPal. The experience here is they invite a user to create a passkey, and when the user decides that he wants to create a passkey, the service is going to issue a request to the operating system of the device, because it is the device, the one that is in this case implementing the FIDO layer, the FIDO layer. The service will request to the device, help me in creating a passkey for this user. Then there will be a pop-up coming from the operating system in order to confirm that that's indeed what the end user wants to do. The request here, but again, this pop-up is coming from the operating system, is, do you really want to create a passkey for this user that you have declared for this particular service, PayPal in this case? And when the user say yes, the rest of the experience is very familiar, because it's only a biometric authentication, the common one from the device, native. And from there, you get a confirmation that the passkey has been created. As easy as that. Once the passkey has been created, we can use it for the other use case that I wanted to show you. And that is basically the user goes now to the site, doesn't have to present the password, just present the username, or selects the username from an autofill form. Pushes the button for login, and automatically he's invited to present biometrics as the first step of the FIDO authentication. When the biometrics are confirmed, you have the cryptographic exchange with the FIDO authentication server, and the user gets access. So looking at it into a little bit of detail, the FIDO authentication is started by the backend. The backend issues a challenge, which is typically a random number. This random number gets to the authenticator. The authenticator processes that challenge, applies cryptography, combines it with the private key of the passkey, and generates a response, a combination of these based on these two values, the challenge and the private key. This response goes back to the authentication backend, and it is processed through the public key in order to conclude whether that authentication was correct or not correct, and that completes the authentication process. So, but from the perspective of the end user, he doesn't see any of these. The only thing that he's going to be exposed to is, as he arrives to the site, he's going to get the pop-up, in this case, from the operating system, asking him if he wants to use the passkey for the PayPal service that is hosted on this device in order to log into the service. When he says yes, then again, familiar experience, biometrics, authentication succeeded. That's a great user experience with a great level of security under the hood. So with that, as a takeaway, in order to close, the main things that we would like you to keep in mind is, first of all, that this is already happening. It's happening at great speed, and it's probably not so much a matter of if service providers are going to implement passkey technology, but just a matter of when they are going to take this step of doing it. And given the benefits and the availability, our recommendation is to go ahead and do it right away. Second point is, well, in order to implement support for passkey for your services, you are going to need to add support for FIDO authentication to your infrastructure. And to that end, well, it may require at the very least the authentication backend, and well, Thales, for example, we can help you with that. And also it can require some support on the client side if you want to implement on your mobile applications the FIDO layer, as we were saying before, or if you want to use tokens for workforce or else. You're going to need that component on the client side. With all of that, we can help you. And the third comment is that indeed we can help you not only with the technology but also with the expertise. We are talking potentially on services about hundreds of thousands or millions of users, and we are talking here about a very sensible service, as is the enablement of the access to these services, the authentication. We have a lot of experience helping our customers transition from legacy authentication solutions to more modern authentication solutions, from on-premise implementations to cloud implementations, and our professional services that are available all around the globe have a lot of experience in driving these projects for hundreds and thousands and millions of users, ensuring a smooth transition, ensuring the continuity of service for the users, which is obviously the concerns when that happens. So you can drive that transition with peace of mind for your customers. Finally, a last poll to conclude. We would like to know if you had already in mind, or if some of what you heard today makes you think about it. Maybe we would like to know if you're planning to deploy Passkeys, if you are now considering to look into it, or if you intend to do it within the next couple of years, or maybe you are already working on it, or if you're not interested, or maybe you will be doing something, but it's going to take you more time. We'll give you a little bit of time for answering. And we don't have a lot of time, but I don't know if we have time maybe for one or two questions. Megan, what do you think?
Yeah, so I thank you, Pedro and Andrew, for those great presentations. I have to do the thing which I always hate to do, which is to tell everybody that we're really close to time, so we're not going to be able to answer that many questions. However, I'm going to make two promises to you all. The first one, so we got over 100 questions, so that's wonderful, and we're really excited about the enthusiasm around Passkeys and understanding there's a lot of questions that people have. Two promises. One, we will go through the questions and then reply to you all in turn. The second one is that we will be holding a virtual summit, which is a 4-hour event dedicated to Passkeys next month. So I promise you all that we will dedicate at least an hour's time to just open Q&A during that time, and we'll bring a bunch of these questions into that as well. So I promise you all that, and I just want you all to just understand that we really appreciate your questions, and we really want to answer them all for you. But the one question I will ask Pedro is around, and we got a few questions around this, around digital signatures. Can Passkeys be used to digitally sign transactions?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, indeed, it can be done, and it's also something that is very necessary for again, for example, for banking, for financial regulations. It is absolutely possible. We can do that by manipulating the challenge. So we're saying that in the protocol, the process starts with a challenge being used by the backend. Typically, this challenge is a pure random. For logging, that's what is used. But if what we want is to sign a transactions, we can send a challenge that is not pure random, but the combination of a random with transaction data, which means that from the perspective of the client, from the perspective of the authenticator, this is transparent. The client is going to be processing that challenge all the same, but the fact that the challenge has been built introducing or combining transaction data makes that the response that is generated acts as an actual valid signature for that transaction. And from the perspective of regulations such as PSD2 for finance in Europe, that's considered a valid dynamic linking, as it is called in PSD2.
Well, thank you. We had questions around FIDO and PSD2, around the EU wallet initiatives, around some basic tech questions around support. And again, I want to thank you all for the questions. And I promise that we will answer your questions. And I do hope we'll see you at the summit next month, where we'll answer a lot of these questions live as well. So please do take the survey at the end of this webinar. And thank you again to Pedro and Andrew for great presentations. And we will see you all soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.